Sustainability has become just a word, which doesn't really have a great deal of meaning anymore, unfortunately. But what we're really talking about is trying to find a way for humankind to live in balance with nature and to achieve the most it can. And that's really what the book's about and what the Club of Rome is about. The book, which is called Reinventing Prosperity, is not actually our favourite title. We originally had this title, and unfortunately I don't think this cartoon is in the German edition. But the title we wanted to use was Your Children and How Not to Kill Them. Because it's about trying to build sufficient change into the system to persuade people to think slightly differently about the economic system so that we move ourselves onto a better path. It's an attempt to say, if we start focusing on the things that people think about, which is not climate change. You know, for 40 years, the Club of Rome and Jürgen and Dennis have been talking about climate change and nobody was listening. Climate change was yesterday's news. So we decided to talk about what people are concerned about. And people are concerned about what the short term. They're concerned about unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And so if we write a book about that, but make a number of suggestions which also begin to fix the problem of climate change, then we can begin to shift humanity onto a better pathway. And that's the thinking behind the book. Today we live in overshoot. We live as if we have 1.6 planet Earths. So the capacity of the Earth has got a certain ability to withstand human existence. And we've passed through that. In fact, we passed through that limit in about the mid-1980s. And today we live as if we have about 1.6 planets. And if we carry on the trend line, if places like China want to have the same standard of living that we have today in Germany, then we would need 4 planet Earths. So it's simply not possible. And what we think is happening, this collapse is the red line, so that we're actually beginning this process. And what the Club of Rome is about and what the book is trying to be about is how do we bring this back into balance in a peaceful, easy way so that we live back in harmony with nature. Climate change is not actually the main problem. And now we come towards the book a bit more. Because climate change is a symptom. It's a symptom of another problem. The problem is the human ecological footprint, right the way back to limits of growth. It's the impact that humanity is having on Earth. None of this would happen if we weren't here. And this is the same chart that I showed you at the beginning, which was 1.6, but it's broken down by regions of the world. So people in America live as if they had 5 planet Earths. In Europe, we live as if we had 3. In Switzerland, where I live, they live as if we have 4. But if you look across on the right, if you look at Asia and Africa, they actually live reasonably sustainably. And so we have this idea in our heads that, the change has to come in India and China and Africa. That's where the problem lies. Because these are industrializing nations that we should not have to change here. But actually the problem is here. We are responsible for most of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. Not Germany, not Europe, but the developed, rich world is responsible for most of this problem. And so we have a responsibility to fix it. The truth is the world's population has been growing too fast. When I was born in 1960, there were 3 billion people on Earth. In 2011, when this chart was made, there were 7 billion people on Earth. Today, about 7.8 billion people. So population is something we can't really change because unless there's a war or famine or some sort of great disease, the population is a relatively fixed number, but it's an issue that we need to discuss. The second problem, the one I think where we have more of a solution, is the economic system. We have a mindset problem. We think that we have to grow our economies because economic growth will create jobs. We think it's going to reduce inequality. We think it's going to reduce poverty. But it doesn't do any of these things. We've got our heads around an idea that, for example, if I look at jobs, if you take unemployment in the rich world, in the OECD, over the last 35 years, unemployment has gone up. And yet we've had some of the fastest growth in human history. And the population has been stable. And that's because economic growth comes from improving productivity, which often involves increasing the level of mechanization, and so it creates unemployment. Similarly, we've got this idea that there's this trickle-down effect, that if we have economic growth, the rich will somehow, their wealth will filter down into the pockets of the poor. I mean, it's just wrong. I mean, Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century, that's basically the message, that this trickle-down effect does not work. The economic system rewards the rich. And so the gap between rich and poor today is bigger than it was 30 years ago and bigger than it was 200 years ago. And the gap between the rich world and the poor world is bigger than it was 200 years ago. So this whole idea that politicians and that consumers have, that the economic system is reducing inequality and creating jobs, is just wrong. I don't want to really go through all the proposals one by one, but these 13 proposals, which perhaps we can talk about afterwards, each one of them is attempting to address these three problems: unemployment, inequality, and climate change. So shortening the length of the working year, by sharing the amount of work and income across an economy more evenly, you reduce unemployment, you reduce inequality, and because people will have to consume less because they'll have a slightly lower income, you reduce the level of consumption, which reduces the level of CO2 emissions, which slows the process of climate change. So all of these 13 solutions are an attempt, and together will reduce unemployment, inequality, and eventually climate change. They are not a fix for the problem. What they're an attempt to do is to move us gradually onto a better path in a way which appeals to the short-term interests of the democratic majority. That most people will benefit from these. The 99% should benefit from these policies. And so therefore they should vote for them. And that was the thinking that we had behind this. And that behind all of that, it makes the transition to a no-carbon economy much easier. We know that this is not going to stop climate change, but it's the only thing that we could think of to try and shift the economic system into a better pathway so that we can then do the things that are necessary to stop climate change. And that's what the book's about.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, a debt ceiling will incorporate it in the budget of the federal government and the German states in the constitution of the German Federal Republic. From 2020 onward, all finance ministers and ministries will no longer be permitted to take on new debt to finance their budget deficits. So I ask you, when we will have a debt ceiling for the use of natural resources? This is sorely needed. What about the proposed measures by the authors of Reinventing Prosperity report? First of all, in my view, our proposals could be realized. They could be realized. It only depends on the will in politics. I agree with the most proposals, not with all, and I'd like to mention some of them. The increasing of the retirement date. I'm a member of a party which fought and fight for the reduction of this date. Why? Because in Germany, the reform of the pension system has been accompanied by the reduction of pension level and, in conclusion, by poverty of pensioners. A lot of them must work to secure their livelihood. I agree with the increasing of corporate and inheritance taxes. I'm a fan of inheritance tax. In particular, the inheritance tax is the key for distribution of assets, is the key for tax income of governments to spend social public services, and is the key for the social justice. And in my opinion, we should debate about the basic income for everyone. Because the advance of this basic income is that the citizens can live in dignity and social independence, and I'm convinced we can finance it. I do not support the illusion that we can solve the environmental issues with tax policy. Taxes are income of the public to spend education, to spend universities, infrastructure, healthcare, and so on, and they are for distribution. If we want to reduce the environmental pollution and the consumption of resources, we need not tax policy, I think we need direct measures, for instance, such as the termination of lignite mining, of brown coal mining. So my conclusion is, how I said, I cannot give the counterpart in this session. I agree with the thesis that we in industrial states need a limit to grow to protect the environment for our children, for our grandchildren, for the future generations.
We feel that ecosystems, the state of the biosphere as such, even without climate change, is an issue. Even if we hadn't climate change, we are in big trouble. And of course, this would be related also to the solutions. Is it really true that all these small-scale solutions, simple solutions, attractive in a way, would really trickle down? I've seen some topics related to the global change that have not been addressed, but others also maybe related to the solutions. So, for example, as an Institute of Higher Education, we saw, well, education was not addressed so much, and this would be one question. You develop solutions for, the change to be generated within the system. And I personally have the doubt sometimes. I feel your thought is really radical. And I think it's clearly expressed also by your presentation. The book isn't, and the solutions aren't. And this was maybe one of the bigger issues we were discussing. Is it really possible to get this change without the paradigm shift, without different thinking, without working on transformation on various levels?
You've mentioned like really, really huge fuel engines of this whole global system. But then in your 13 proposals, you're talking about taxation, but not at all about the financial system, not at all. And there's no vision. How could it be different?
What we tried to do was take what I hope I've explained is a very, very complicated situation. I mean, we all the world's problems to us, all the environmental problems, all the social problems, from species loss to pollution to climate change, to what's happening to the world's oceans, to inequality, to poverty, to migration, to the political crisis, all have the same root cause, which is our economic system. And that's a very, very complicated story to try and explain when a publisher says you must do that in 280 pages, and we want to try and get to as big an audience as possible. Our thinking is if we can shift the perception that people have of the economic system just a little bit, if we can make them question the need for economic growth and see that there's a link between that and climate change, then we can start a process where they might think about other things as well. Maybe all this species loss is also because we're very material and we want to consume a lot. And maybe what we're doing to the world's oceans is because we drink water out of plastic bottles instead of a glass. We begin to start a process, a catalyst to change, which begins to change the way people think. I see signs of change everywhere. I see signs of change wherever I speak, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas. There is a growing awareness of the need for change. And it's a grassroots level, it's a political level, and we don't need everybody to understand the problem. We don't need everybody to agree to make this change. It just needs 15 to 20% of the population to tip things over. Occupy, the umbrella revolution in Hong Kong, things can change very quickly. So the reason I get up every day is because I think we can do something. We can achieve that change. And it's difficult to predict when or how or where, but I think it is possible. And that's why I feel optimistic.